Now, thank you very much. We continue the conversation on emerging trends. We just spent the last hour and a half looking at the French vigilance law, essentially looking at the role of government in regulating the activities. I'm delighted to say that this sort of thinking and regulation of companies is not only in France or in Europe, it also takes place in other parts of the world. And I'm delighted to say that there is a ministerial directive in Indonesia where there is an expectation of mandatory certification for human rights before fishing in Indonesian waters. And this, of course, also reflects this trend of governments giving guidance on what they expect of companies. I'll leave the details of that to the panel, the distinguished panel that we have, with a moderator who needs no further introduction than James Kalman. So, James, you have the floor.
Thank you, Michael. You know, Indonesia is a developing country, and I'm Indonesian, actually. I'm now Indonesian, and I'm proud to say that Indonesia not only is a developing country, but it is a surging country in terms of human rights, civil society engagement, and the rest. And it is a country that is leading in the area of protection of seafarers and stakeholders in the fisheries industry. And that's what we're here today to discuss, something that is breathtaking, really, and Indonesian leadership that's taking place doing that. And so we have, as Michael Otto said, just an amazing panel to discuss this, of Indonesian leaders, but leaders that are known in the world too. So let me just briefly introduce them again. We of course have the Honorable Minister of Fisheries, Minister Susi Pujiastuti. Minister Susi, one thing that was not said this morning is she was recently named one of the 100 most prominent people, prominent women, by BBC, if I'm correct. And yes. And for those of us from Indonesia, that's not a surprise at all, because she is not only one of the top 100, she is loved. She is a minister that is loved and respected, and is just doing a great job for the people. The minister is not only her current profile or portfolio within the government, but in the past she was a businesswoman, and she dealt with disadvantaged communities as a businesswoman. And so she's really unique in her understanding about business and human rights. She's somebody who has straddled both of those worlds and lives and has lived in both of those worlds. So we're very fortunate for you to again hear some comments from her, and more specifically about this regulation. To the right of me, we have Pasharif Vijaya. Pasharif is the Director General of Fish Capture. He is the man that's on the ground implementing this human rights certification regulation in Indonesia. He's the man that put it into implementation and is responsible for making sure that it's successful and adopted throughout the country. So it's a big job, a huge job. To the left of Michael Otto, we have Dr. Makarim Wibisono. Probably some of you know him because 4 years ago he was the chairman of this whole plenary, the whole Human Rights in Business, the second annual Human Rights in Business conference. He was the chairman of it. He's the former UN ambassador from Indonesia. He presided over the UN Human Rights Commission when Professor Ruggie's mandate was appointed. So he is somebody well known within these halls of the United Nations. And further to the left of Dr. Makarim is Pak Marzuki Darusman. again, somebody that everybody here knows, the current lead UN investigator for human rights in Myanmar, human rights investigator for several other countries, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, the former UN Special Rapporteur for human rights in North Korea, former Attorney General, former head of the Human Rights Commission in Indonesia. So this is exciting in so many ways because we have this incredible panel of business or ex-business women, government officials, and civil society, the highest echelon of civil society and human rights advocacy in Indonesia. So this is really an exciting discussion in so many ways. So, if we can, let's get right into it. And I think we've prepared a short video that maybe will get everybody focused on what this is all about and why this is so important.
Mengapa bisa terjadi perdagangan manusia di usaha perikanan?
Tahun 2010, 57 juta ton ikan memasuki pasar global dengan nilai ekspor mencapai 125 miliar US dollar. Permintaan pasar internasional terus meningkat, namun tidak diikuti dengan usaha perikanan yang bertanggung jawab, yang akhirnya mengakibatkan rusaknya ekosistem laut. Kerusakan ini membuat kapal harus berlayar lebih jauh ke fishing ground. Upah awak kapal dengan wilayah penangkapan ikan yang lebih jauh dapat mencapai 30 hingga 50% dari biaya operasional penangkapan ikan. Untuk menekan biaya ini, perusahaan menggunakan tenaga kerja yang murah tanpa asuransi kecelakaan kerja dan perlindungan keselamatan. Tenaga kerja murah ini umumnya berasal dari praktik perdagangan orang di negara-negara berkembang, termasuk Indonesia. Mengapa banyak awak kapal perikanan Indonesia menjadi korban perdagangan manusia? Kelangkaan sumber daya perikanan membuat para nelayan yang awalnya dapat menangkap ikan dengan mudah di sekitar pesisir terpaksa menjadi pekerja migran di kapal asing. Dengan pendidikan yang minim dan kebutuhan untuk mencari nafkah, mereka terjebak dalam perekrutan tenaga kerja ilegal. Perlakuan yang melanggar hak-hak tenaga kerja, serta pelanggaran terhadap kebebasan pribadi dan hak untuk hidup kerap diterima oleh awak kapal yang direkrut secara ilegal. Beberapa kasus pelanggaran hak asasi manusia terhadap awak kapal terungkap. Lalu, apa yang dilakukan oleh pemerintah Indonesia? Pada 10 Desember 2015, yang merupakan Hari Hak Asasi Manusia Internasional, Kementerian Kelautan dan Perikanan telah menetapkan Peraturan Menteri Kelautan dan Perikanan Nomor 35 Tahun 2015 tentang sistem dan sertifikasi hak asasi manusia pada usaha perikanan. Pada November 2016, kembali menerbitkan Peraturan Menteri Kelautan dan Perikanan Nomor 42 Tahun 2016. tentang Perjanjian Kerja Laut, serta pada Januari 2017 menerbitkan Permen KP nomor 2 tahun 2017 tentang mekanisme sertifikasi hak asasi manusia pada usaha perikanan. Selain membuat aturan untuk melindungi para pekerja di usaha perikanan, pemerintah Indonesia bersama lembaga terkait juga menyelesaikan berbagai kasus pelanggaran HAM pada usaha perikanan. Bagaimana agar perdagangan manusia tidak terjadi lagi? Perdagangan manusia adalah kejahatan transnasional yang terorganisir. Mari bersinergi untuk mencegah adanya perdagangan manusia. Cegah dan lawan segala bentuk perdagangan manusia untuk mewujudkan produk perikanan yang menjunjung asas keberlanjutan dan bebas dari pelanggaran hak asasi manusia.
So you can see the scale of the issue. And Minister Susi, a lot of people have seen this over the years, over the decades, over the centuries. A lot of people have seen this. The Associated Press wrote about it, and it became big international news. Very few people have ever done anything about it, but you did. Why did you?
Guess someone has to do something and start. So, and I see in the last decade, Indonesia had been suffered a lot from illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. We lost almost 46% of our fisheries household. We lost 115 companies that export. And there are other property that is happen because of this illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. And other than that, we also see that the way the environment, the people work at board at sea is not a very appropriate and very minimum on facility, on also capacity to basically for people to live for that long time at sea. So that was the reason why. And also to see what the Associated Press was reporting about the few victims from Myanmar that's happened, and they talk about Benjina. So I come close to investigate and make more things with the policy and investigations and everything, and we see more than we could even think. And that's what basically making me that all these people who work at sea and the fishing industry are very at the most worst conditions of work to live. They have a minimum fresh water to drink. They have a very limited place to sleep, and they even not sleep because when they have the fishing is ongoing, the fish is so much, they have to take care. They probably 2-3 days are not sleeping at all, and many other that bad conditions. And what we see, illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing is also doing it offshore. Everything is done offshore. So nobody look, nobody monitor, nobody control. So basically they just do whatever they can to these people. And based on all these, I've been feeling to do something. And that's why we launched on the 10th December last year for the human rights compliances into fishing industry and also other fisheries sector. And it is unfair to see multi-billion-dollar business that's enjoyed by all those big companies, and we enjoy also the nicest seafood without any thoughts of the people who got it for us. They live very inappropriate facility. some of them, they even never been home at all for 30 years. The one we found in Benjina that we freed them, there had been many of them more than 20 years, doesn't see their family, doesn't even in contact with their family. They've been trade and traffic, so they don't know until they're waking up they are offshore on board. And they transit from one boat to another boat, and that's forever. And then what we see now, the ILO also once revealed fishing is considered to be the world's most dangerous occupations, right? So it's more than 24,000 fishers lost their lives every year. But other than that, there's not much been done to protect human rights in fishing industry from international level. So I see it. We want Indonesia is a big maritime country. We have to start something. When we're reforming the IUU fishing, we also have to reform the human rights part, because without that, we don't do full reforming, I think. And at 2011 UNODC report also that the trafficking victims on fishing industry are exposed to very cruel and inhuman treatment, and we see that from the Associated Press report also. So that's why what I did in the first month, I was issuing the moratorium for all illegal ex-foreign fishing vessels that operate in Indonesia, and then we also ban on transshipment, because without ban the transshipment we weren't able to get any information at all. We weren't able to see what's happened actually at all, because they do everything offshore. So we do the moratorium, ban on transshipment, and from that we pull everybody, and that's the way how we can get this Myanmar and Cambodian people at Benjina Island to freedom. So, and of course to continue the reformation without the policy and regulation in place, we will not able to be here to achieve what we have right now. And by consistency, with a strong commitment and consistency on what we do on combat the illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, we also benefit. Now the country has increase of the fish stock almost double, and we try to revitalize our fisheries sector. We ban transshipment, so there's no more people have to be work on board for months and months. Now the fish is easy to catch, the people doesn't have to go far anymore. But what worry me now that we see on the last after the illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing in Indonesia water is taken care, they have new operation modus, so they move and doing it at the high seas. And while in high seas is nobody jurisdictions, nobody's land, nobody could monitor and enforce anything. So, and for this I'm trying to call United Nations to start an initiative that we not only think of human rights, the base of this on the fishing industry to protect the human rights of people is by putting enforcement into the ocean rights. So, because if they do it at high seas and no institution, no jurisdictions, no legal frame to get these people, it will be difficult. So we need to come together. The fish stock is very important for the world. The health of the ocean is also important for the world. Our 71% of our planet are oceans. 29% are land. And 60% of that 71% is the high seas, where no jurisdictions, where it's become nobody's land. And now the transnational organized crime on fishing industry is happening and taking place at the high seas. And the victim is not only the people on the seamen, but also the people who live in the coastal, who live from the coastal fisheries. That's also an abusing of human rights of the coastal fisheries people, the island people, because mostly the people who do high seas fishing are the country distant fishing, who doesn't own the coastal line. But they come and they have the capacity with their big and giant boat to go. And now the last we investigate is that they keep the people board in the boat for more than a year, even 2-3 years. They never land basically. So the catch, the seamen, everything is transshipped at the high seas. So United Nations, all of us, we have to collaborate together on this to work to solve the problem of not only the human rights that we have to address, but also the depleting of fish stocks that we will need. The nations are, the world population is increased every year. We need more food. And the cheapest protein diet for all of us is fish. And then most of the fishing at the high seas happening is done by all these big organizations, and they do a lot of abuse in human rights. So that's what I mean to start. So.
You know, when we saw that movie, we saw pictures of people, Ibu Menteri.
Yeah.
We saw pictures of people. Actually, you know, when we go into, I listened to some of the talking in the plenary today, and when we go into a factory, we see people in a factory, but fishery happens way out there, as you were discussing, on the high seas. It happens way out there. You actually gave us a face. You gave us the face that we all saw, that we never saw before. We saw factory workers, but we didn't see fisheries workers. And my next question that I want to ask you is, just carrying on from what you just said. As I understand your standard, it covers environmental issues, it covers labor issues, it covers all of the things that the UN Guiding Principles say that we shouldn't have negative impacts. Corporations shouldn't have negative impacts. But your regulation has gone further. You've said the corporation should have positive impacts. And you just talked about it with restocking the fisheries, with providing livelihoods so that small fishermen can still catch fish and have a livelihood. So in fact, in this room, we always talk about the UN Guiding Principles. It seems that your standard has gone beyond that to not only don't have a negative impact, but requiring, and I believe the word is even in there, requiring that companies have a positive impact. Can you comment on that?
So with the regulation that we do on human rights compliances, that every seaman that will go board, they have to have insurance. So when there's accident or anything at sea, the family, because mostly they depend on this one man that work at sea, so the family will get the benefits, at least the cover, because at the moment mostly the accident happen and it only name coming back. They don't even know where is the accident happen, and the problem is not only what we free in Indonesia, that's only 1,000. We're happy to do that, but we also see there are about 400,000 Indonesian seamen out at the world water, not in Indonesia. And the way IUU fishing is operating is they use different nationality crew on different water. So like in Indonesia, they use the Cambodians, they use the Rohingya, Myanmar, and Indonesian seamen, they work at Bering Sea or in in South America, an example. So, and we see from that. So we put the regulation and force it that if we don't, they don't get the permit for fishing in our water. But the problem for this kind of regulation, we can't enforce it to foreign fishing vessel at foreign water, not at international water, not in our water. So this is only happened for our country. So, and I think regard the SDG, the life below the water, it's become a part that we have to also protect. I think ocean rights, human rights, it's all both together. It has to be to be addressed, or otherwise the sustainability, the business itself will get the benefit by complying into all these regulation, I believe.
Thank you, Bu Menteri. Pak Syarif, maybe I turn to you. I know that the preceding the drafting of the regulations, there was something like 1,100 ex-foreign fishing vessels that were audited.
Yeah.
And I believe that, in fact, they didn't even pass, none of them really passed all of the regulations in terms of the Ministry of Fishery regulations, in terms of labor regulations and the rest. How did that inform the drafting of the standard, and where is the process of implementation on the drafting of the standard?
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Excellency Minister Susi, colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen. So the government of Republic of Indonesia actually learned a lot from the past experience. As Ibu Menteri mentioned, Minister Susi mentioned about the past experience in the human rights abuse in fishing industries, especially in the Benjina case. So the government of Indonesia now starting to regulate what is the human rights implication in the fishing industries. So we start with the policy. First, we need to leaderships of the government. A leadership should involving in all aspects of the fishing industries. Policy, we start with the ministerial decree on number 35, 1915, which mentioning that based on monitoring and evaluation of 1,132 foreign fishing vessels which not comply with the fisheries regulation in Indonesia, then we set up the policy that every fisheries business should comply with this ministerial decree, which comprises of, first is a human right system in the fishing industry. So the company should adopt the fishing human right policy itself. Corporate policy on human right due diligence, process conducted by fisheries business owners to identify, prevent, mitigate, and educatively address the impact of human rights violations. And thirdly is a human rights remedy, process to resolve human rights violation. So we try to socialization to all the companies, the fishing industry in Indonesia, that they should adopt the policy as what we call it, the owner and also the high-level managers to adopt this policy. Secondly, we issued the certification process for all the fishing business in Indonesia. We try to assess and ensure that the compliance of the fishery business owners to respect of human rights. We set up the certification body that we control, the government will control all the institutions who has the capacity to accredit all the fishing business in Indonesia and issuing the certificate. We start with the training of the officer, training of the accreditation body, and training of the certification body. And thirdly, we start to think about the failure to comply. what is the impact if they do the negative practices in the human right. First is the suspension or revocation of fishery business license. We start to issuing that all the fishing license should relate it to the human right implementation at their own company. Secondly, recommendation to the Minister of Manpower to revoke labor utilization permit. And thirdly, public announcement. We try to publicly, regularly, the best practices of the human right in the fishing industry and also the best practices. So encouraging the people to show the best practices of the fishing industry business, which allowing the human right to be implemented. So thirdly, we try to get the protection of the people through the ministerial regulation on work and fishing agreement. Start from the recruitments, training, all the facilities, including the protection of the insurance and others. This is a kind of the comprehensive package of this regulation to be implemented in the fishing industry in Indonesia. And finally, it's the prosecution. We try to set up the cooperation partnership with all the general attorney, police, navy, everything, to check and secure that all the fishing industry in Indonesia comply with the the application of the human rights in the fishing industry. I think that the content of the ministerial regulation.
But, dear Jen, that's really leadership, and I'm sure Michael Lado, having been with the working group from the beginning, I'm sure that's music to your ears. Those kind of things are music to your ears. One last question, Pak Sharif, and we do have to move quickly, but I wanted to ask you, I know that there's been 2 pilots that have been done, and maybe you could comment about what has been the result of that, and are those the benchmark for future audits going forward and implementation going forward?
Well, in Indonesia, we have around 568,000 fishing boats operated in Indonesia. And we have around 12,000 fishing boats above 30 gross tonnage operated in Indonesia. So at the beginning, we start to implement the human right in fishing business for all the fishing boats above 30 gross tonnage. And we select 2 fishing commercial business from the state-owned company and also 2 private sectors which operated either in the territory and also in high seas. Based on this implementation, that we understand that the socialization should be taken place at the beginning. So we try to get the champion among all the fishing industries who implement the human right properly. Based on this champion, and then we try to separate it, all the best practices and good experience to other fishing business in Indonesia. So I believe by the time, year, 2 years, the Indonesian fishing industries start to implement human rights in proper manners for the future of the fishing industry in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Dirjen. You sound incredibly committed.
What we do is also fully transparency on the business. So we basically publish the licensing that we issue, the name of the company, where they operate, what they do, and also we naming and shaming. Or if we revoke the license, we also announcing it. And why I did this? The practice of IUUF, an example before that's been done by foreign vessels, it's more than 10,000 foreign fishing vessels at our water, operate basically 1,300 have license, but over fraud documentations, and the rest are basically totally illegal. And you as an independent and a sovereign state, it is impossible that you see 10,000 more foreign vessels fishing illegally for decades without any consolidation or cooperation with local officers, with law enforcement officers. So to change this is not easy. And it's very tough and very difficult to change an establishment of such a practice. What I start is we have to make an open and make it public. The fight, the cracking down of illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing is a nation's consensus, is a nation's movement. It's not only fisheries or marine affairs fisheries fight, but it's a nation fight against illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. So we publicly, open, transparent. I allowed to have my cell phone number to be published. So the report are starting coming there, and then this how we consolidate everything. And it's opening up the case Benjina and also Mabiru in Ambon, which everybody, I think the world finally opening up, or such a thing is happening at sea. And naming and shaming, I think that's one of the things. And what I see here, that fight for the good thing is benefits you incredible. The country get the benefits now, the fish stock are increasing. The local fishermen, the small fishermen, they don't have to go far anymore. We also discipline in one policy, which we also limited the size of the boat. We are coastal fisheries country, so we don't need 1,000 gross tonnage fishing vessel, which is going to drain out your fish stock, because they're going to use hundreds of kilometers net or 150 kilometers of long line. It's going to fish out everything. So we also discipline on issuing the policy. So here we issue the human rights compliances, but we also issue the management of fishing itself. By doing this, we not only protect the human right for the individual seaman, but we also protect the human right in general, because the health of the ocean, the fish stock, is also the needs of every human that is alive. So it's all in this matter. Yeah, we not only doing by regulations, but we also managing it public, transparent. So the traceability of the fish itself, the transparency on the management, on our fishing allocations is also all are public. There's no more secret, there's no more thing that is closed about fisheries in Indonesia. And with the way we can consistently also getting the support from the community, getting support from the people. And with that, we are able to enforce the reformations. It's not easy, but when the public, when the people is behind you, it's make it easy to roll it, to launching it. And I hope with our experience to share here, it's encourage another state to do the same. Because human rights issues or the violences issues in environment, it will be tough to crack down without government initiative. Government is the only one who can push further and faster when the issues need to be addressed. I heard today from all the plenary, the panel member today that many countries still struggle. But I do believe if the government has the initiative, the leadership, the ownership on rolling launching the human rights compliances, the environment awareness, I do believe things will be good. But of course, government need the push from United Nations as the organization of the states of the world. So all this community together will make something easier to work it out. And I do believe this this can giving benefit to international community. Thank you.
Excellency Susie, that's really leadership, and talking about the race to the top, and Pat Dirjan, just, that's really leadership and showing how to get to the top. So it's fabulous. If I can switch over to Pat Marzuki, I'd like to understand, Pat Marzuki, you are the chairman of the Foundation for International Human Rights Reporting Standards. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is, what your role was, why FIHRRST was involved in this, and also, can you explain from a standards point of view, I've heard you say that this certification is UNGP plus, or going beyond the UNGPs, as I was maybe mentioning before, but I'd like to understand from you as an expert in human rights and the UNGPs, how you see that, and if you can comment on that, please.
Thank you. Thank you, James. I'll be somewhat brief because I think we want to have a bit of time for the Q&A. Let me start by commending the organizers, Michael, and say that it's probably good to continue on where the previous session left off, and so make that connection between the discussions in this session with the one with the previous one. And I think the organizers were wise in placing this session in sequence to that one. The point being that the notion of a soft law was raised, and this would be perhaps the bridging element between these two sessions. Soft law being an agreement on norms which are not binding, and this was mentioned in Professor Ragi's book as being the first stage of a norm being accepted as binding eventually. And listening to the presentation from the French government, it would seem that the vigilant law, in fact, started with soft law and ended up with the law that is in place at the moment. Now, before I go to introducing the issue here, first is a research body, a human rights research body, which was set up. It's a Belgium-based foundation dedicated to human rights research, an area that may have been somewhat left behind of the advocacy thrust that was the profile of human rights for so many years, and in the context of Indonesia, where some of the founders came from, the conditions had evolved within the context of the Indonesian scene of going out from the statistics of the National Human Rights Commission, that the number one complaints were not anymore security-related issues, but law and order. But the second most, the highest complaints were corporate-related violations, and therefore the situation had called for the need to look into the area of business and human rights, and therefore one of the earliest work that we had addressed, the foundation had addressed, was to look into the business and human rights issue. And this, of course, follows in the wake of the 2011 adoption of the UNGPs in the Human Rights Council, and therefore I think I take this occasion also to commend the work of Professor Raghi that has now opened up the path for an orderly evolution of how we might go about in addressing this the issue of business and human rights. Now, going back to the issue, to the fact that the Indonesian ministry came out with a regulation, analogous to the French context, I suppose, which started out with a soft law, ended up with a hard law, a vigilant law. Our soft law was in fact the UNGPs. And it now ended up with, in the Indonesian context, with a regulation that refers to the UNGP, and there's clearly a UNGP footprint in the regulation, defining human rights due diligence as the centerpiece for implementing the regulation, and therefore leading up to the possibility of setting standards which would allow comparison and measurement of progression if a company were to voluntarily comply with human rights norms. And therefore, I think it has been too long that the debate has been hampered by this artificial, perhaps superficial juxtaposition between mandatory and voluntary. Perhaps the right word would be discretionary in terms of the government taking the lead in addressing business and human rights issues within the context of the implementation of the UNGPs. And therefore, this would perhaps signal the way forward in the sense that if governments take the lead in issuing regulations that are mandatory, then it falls within the mandate of the government and the obligation of the government, which is the first pillar of the UNGPs, in seeing to it that human rights norms and human rights concepts are complied with by the business community. And therefore, it is a moot point to define whether or not compliance with human rights norms would be mandatory or voluntary, and therefore it brings out the issue that as we go forward and governments take the lead in issuing regulations, then it would in fact meet the requirements of the UNGPs as being voluntary, but voluntarily complied by companies. And therefore, setting standards within the context of Indonesia with this regulation sets the context of also applying the same ideas in other areas of the economy and industry. And FIHRRST has been privileged in being associated with supporting the government in this sense. This is an entirely product of the Indonesian government, at the moment by the Ministry of Fisheries. We were just there to provide any assistance that might have been needed, if only because we had started earlier in looking into business and human rights issues. So that's the short history behind the role of FIHRRST.
Thank you, Pak Marzuki. Pak Makarim, just bringing some of this together. Pak Marzuki was just talking about mandatory versus voluntary. Minister Susi before was talking essentially about the government's absolute responsibility to protect. which is very much in accordance with the guiding principles. Can you square those two circles, how you can have something mandatory? And I do understand that we don't want to get caught up in just terminology, but can you bring this into a UNGP context, point one? And point two, how do you expect this, and from this exact discussion, do you expect this standard to become a standard of care globally, and how do we get there?
Thank you, James, for the question. First of all, allow me to express my appreciation to the organizer for letting me speaking in the session. Your question is actually remind me to the debate in the Human Rights Commission in the year 2005. At the time, I was the chairman of the UN Human Rights Commission. The House was divided at that period of time. One considered that these issues of human rights abuse in the part of the business or cooperation should be addressed by a legally binding treaty. And then the other side consider that this is actually a private sector. Private sector should not be subject of international public law, international public law. So at that period of time, the issues were stuck. Yeah, nobody actually can have such kind like a brilliant idea to bridge the divided. So eventually, we consider that maybe we do need a third person. At that time, we agreed that Professor John Ruggie from Harvard University to be appointed to make study to try to find out, not either or, but how can we move in the framework that are acceptable to all. Yeah? At that time, we gave time to Professor Ruggie till 2008. Yeah? So about 3 years. He was very diligent. He interviewed himself many corporations around the world. Yeah? And then eventually, he made such kind of report that reflected the 3 pillars: the duty, respect, and remedy. So up to them, after that, the discussion becoming more encouraging, because there is a light at the end of the tunnel that something can bridge, this the two competing or rivalry of way out. So in the year 2011, UNGP was adopted. So this is actually a very important step in the discussion of business and human rights in the Human Rights Council. So when I was appointed as the chairman of the second United Nations Forum on Business and Human Rights, so all of the participants will focus on the issue: how can we translate the norm into the reality? It's not on the conceptual level, but how can it work in the grassroots? So at that time, the focus was how can we implement it? It was so beautiful in the conceptual level, but how can we implement it? Yeah. So at that period of time, we were actually shocked because of the Rana Plaza accident. There is 1,100 killed because of it. There is also Kentex manufacturing collapse. We have disclosure of Benchina issues of forced labor, that are actually doing illegal fishing, in Indonesia. So, in the absence of a clear mechanism to implement United Nations guiding principle, so I was fortunate to have, the Iron Lady, Minister of Marine and Fisheries. In the absence of that kind of guidance, she come with a clear idea. Of course, it is actually a risking policy. At the time, everyone will be very familiar that there are many or thousands of fishing were doing illegal fishing in Indonesia. Yeah. So Minister Puji issued a regulation number 35, 2015, that require fishing companies to obtain certification. So this is the authority required to the vessel. Yeah? And then this company to be obtain certification on their compliance with human rights standard as a prerequisite to receiving the license to operate in Indonesian water. So without certification, you are not able to operate in Indonesian water. You know, so this such kind of like obligation, yeah, that the vessel or the corporation should comply with, and that the certification itself cover, you know, the management system as well as the impact assessment on their activities in Indonesia. The ministerial regulation set out the expectation that all fishing companies in Indonesia shall respect human rights and conduct appropriate human rights due diligence and remediation of human rights violation. The mandatory certification required by the regulation will result in fishing company that operate in Indonesia having no option at all but to respect human rights throughout their operation if they wish to retain their operational license. So if you would like to operate in Indonesia, there is no other option, that you have to respect the human rights. Yeah. I think it is the best practice, yeah, that had been conducted by the Ministry of Fisheries in Indonesia. And I believe that this can be shared, yeah, with other members of the United Nations. Because the exchange of best practice and lessons learned is a fundamental step that are actually beneficial for consensus building process in the global level. Yeah. If we refer to the principle of the UNGP, you know, this mentioned explicitly that UNGP should be actually focused and addressing the most vulnerable groups, you know, in the society. So the initiative taken by Minister Susi to address the seaman or seafarer are actually in line with the spirit of the founder of the UNGP. Yeah. So when I was on the trip to go to Geneva, I read an article about how the way the seamen live. Yeah. May I read it? Yeah. That the life of seaman, he stated that he has to work and live in a tiny and hard to turn around space on board. So even you move when you sleep, it's very difficult. Their berths are only kind on the wide and packed head too. He made a joke. I quote, "The sleeping place of one of my colleagues was so awkward that there was no leg space and he had to climb over a heap of engine parts to reach his berth." It was really a very tough and also suffering for the seaman. Yeah. So, therefore, in this context, it is important for company to make a policy statement that respect human rights. Yeah? I will make a final statement that marine resources are not infinitely exploitable. For the sake of sustainability of fisheries resources and protection of marine ecosystem, illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing activity must be stopped, because IUU fishing causes serious damage to the life of seafarer and seamen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Makarim. We only have a few minutes left until the translators leave. But if I understand correctly, we can stay and there can be some questions afterwards. Is that right? There are other sessions, so some people have to leave. They can leave. But I want to ask one last question, because anyway, there's only a few minutes left. And that is just leaving off from where Dr. Makarim just left the conversation. Excellency Susi and Dirjan Sharif, I guess the real question here is, this is a global problem, and you've done something bold, really bold. As Dr. Makarim said, the Iron Lady has done something very bold. Is this something that Indonesia intends to lead on as well? It's understood that other nations have to do their share. As Excellency, as you've said, there are 400,000 or 500,000 Indonesian fishermen, and who are protecting them? You're protecting everybody else's fishermen. You guys are protecting everybody else's seafarers, but who's protecting Indonesian seafarers? And so, is this something that Indonesia will continue to lead on in this chamber?
I mean, we want to do that. If we can, we have the opportunity, and I think we should do that, because to share what benefit that we get by having the result of reforming on human rights, on fishing management in Indonesia, we have so much of benefits which we did not count before, but now we see it. Even numbers on economy, we can share it, the numbers, and it's an unbelievable increase of almost 6.5 million tons of fish stock. The fisherman doesn't have to go more than 2 hours, 3 hours. They already get the fish they need, and many other great benefits which we can share. But the second of all, I mean, nowadays, I think with the awareness of new generations, our children, our future leaders of world, I think we need to just put in place that human rights, environment, it's no options to other than compliance for the world, for every state, for every leader. We can't make any more bargain or compromising for that two things, environment and human rights. I think it's two are very, very basic, very essential for all of us. Without the respect of these two, it will be not good for all of us. So these two matter, two issues that all the world has to come to the point that there is no other options than paying compliance. And the benefit, it's come. Sustainability will be in place for the businesses because they do things in appropriate manner. And the government will get less headache to address the human rights issues, the violence here, the criminality and everything, because things just run well. And that's my last word.
So all that we can do is applaud that kind of leadership and thank this panel. I think if there are any questions from the group, I know it's 6 o'clock and people are supposed to leave for other meetings, but if there are any questions, I think we can take some. So please.
Yep. Andy Hall, representing the Migrant Worker Rights Network from Thailand, working with fishermen issues also. I think the actions of the Indonesian government, also the Thai government and many others have been very commendable on addressing IUU fishing, and we've seen so much that's been developing here. Last year, Nestle issued a report with Verite on the situation in the seafood industry in Thailand, acknowledging that their supply chain was full of human slavery. What they didn't say in that report is how they were going to remedy the situation. And I think that is a big issue. We're in a conference here dealing with the issue of remedies. So it would be really interesting to hear from the Indonesian delegation how the government is going to deal with the issue of remedying seafarers who have spent a lot of their life in situations of human slavery. We see that on a global scale the world has been very bad in providing remediation to victims of slavery, and that's something that's gone on for many decades or centuries. So how is the Indonesian government going to work to ensure that these people who have suffered for so long are remedied for the abuses that they've suffered?
As what we mentioned, we have put the requirement to any businesses to start with. So on the prevention side, we make the regulation has to be fulfilled by any businesses in fishing industry. The remedy is what happened with Benjina, an example. We help and assist the Myanmar embassy, also the Cambodian embassy, to have discussions with the company, and finally they got the compensations. And what we are here in our ministerial now, because it's no more foreign vessel issues, but more into the local issues, we put the naming and shaming and revoking the licensing, so they don't have possibility to run away, because by publishing it they have the basically public punishment, and can come into the boycott the product and things like that. That we educate and encourage the community to also involve on this, putting pressure on them. And our KKP, our ministerial, is also giving advocation for all these fishermen. So that's what we do. We have a special program on that for advocating the fishermen who has problem with the companies. That's what we do. So.
Well, other than that, is that we have a port-state measure agreement between all the countries. We can issuing the bilateral cooperation between country to country concerning about the fishing vessel operated between countries. So this bilateral cooperation should contain of the details of pre-departure recruitment, placement mechanisms, training, certification, surveillance, and protection mechanisms. Then also minimum requirement for work and on board for fishing industries, for fishing vessels. So PSMA can be adopted, port-state measure agreement can be adopted among the countries who own and operates the fishing vessel abroad. In fact, we still have Indonesia, we still have 400 fishing vessels crew works internationally in the fishing vessels which operates in the high seas. So we concerned about the situation of work for them at the moment. So we asked through the bilateral cooperation about the fishing vessel registration and also the crew list of all the international fishing vessels. Then we try to ask the condition of our fishing crew operated abroad. Thank you.
Yes, I was wondering whether, Madam Minister, you could speak to the challenges of implementing, realizing the Regulation 35 and these other initiatives to strengthen human rights in the fishing industry, while Indonesia has also governed in a decentralized manner, where the provinces are very strong and the national government, while not being weak, certainly has limited reach in some of these provincial areas. Thank you.
The question is, Indonesia is a big country, and how does Indonesia implement a regulation like this in so many jurisdictions, so many important leaky areas? Is that am I paraphrasing it right, or?
Indonesia is rather famous for embarking in a decentralization, devolution process to give greater powers to the provinces as a means of cutting back, I think, on some corruption that might have been present previously, making for a more responsive government in the provinces. So it's not just merely that there's an archipelago nation and it's big and it's maritime, but that in fact its governance structure limits to some extent what the national government can do in the provinces. And to the extent that I'm wrong, please clarify, and to the extent that I might be near the truth or more accurate, please let us know how you intend to overcome the challenges that might be present.
Of course, challenge is always different in every country. Indonesia, with the big territorial water, it's 70% of our territorial oceans, and is almost impossible to control. So the strong leadership and consistency make no room of compromising to such bad practices, or you allow discrepancies here and there too much. That's also can be problem. So that's a challenge in our. So people call me bold, but I think in my opinion, being consistent, that there's no compromising of being difference. That's very important, to put things to be respect and able to lead the commitment that everybody, you can't play anymore this time. There's no corruptions or compromising here. There is no discrepancy you will get of anything on this matter, because as what I said, when you talk about human rights, about environment, no, not only Indonesia, but the world has to start together, come to the same conclusions and commitment. For these two, you don't put politic space to play, because it's impossible. Two are the essential of us being human, and for the environment, it's also very important. And if you continue this consistency, I do believe deterrent effect, giving the deterrent effect, giving the people understand that this time no is no. Basically, you have to explain, you mean what you say, and you say what you mean. There's no other difference. So that message is sent out, and I do believe people will understand that, and they will not try. So that's on my point of view challenge. So what we did, example, we sent away more than 10,000 foreign vessels. Not that because our navy have thousands of warships, no, but because we commit, and this is national consensus, we execute our constitution to sink the boat, and that scared them. And they're gone. And we ban the transshipment, we do the moratorium, and you can't play around. But of course, the top-down backing and support is also very important. The nation has to be together first. And this is what we did. And we successfully able to commit this. And of course, I also understand that, how you call it, period of government are limited. So the legacy only possible being placed when it's public. To be published, to be understood, to be recognized by the nations. That's very important, so that the people cannot just flip it over again back to the old time when regime is finished. So I think this best I can do to make sure that this challenge what we have done is will not affect it again. But I think with more collaborations and more communications, more campaign to this kind of issues, and more leadership involvement from many state leaders in the world that can bring things into the good side. Yeah.
Just quickly, James, I happen to have a copy of the regulation. You're welcome to take this. But it does say that the authority to suspend licenses, to issue certification, is a central government prerogative. So it has nothing to do with the regions having the authority to do so. So that's very clear in the regulation, that the sole authority on this issue is the central government. Now, just as a closing, before wrapping up, I think we are at a crossroad, Michael, in terms of the UNGPs moving forward. I may have missed mentioning that the notion of a UNGP plus is that we are now 5 years hence from 2011, and anything that comes after that is UNGP plus, and therefore the initiative taken by the French government, by the Indonesian government, would in fact indicate the path forward, and that is compliance on the basis of government discretion to encourage companies to comply with human rights norms. And therefore, I think this is a very historic moment in the annual forum of business and human rights. We look forward to a path ahead, which I think under the auspices of the working group will then be able to steer us to a new era where standard setting, that was the theme of the past, is now standard implementation. And that is where we are at the moment. Thank you.
One thing, we also have Minister Decree Regulation number 58, with giving disciplinary punishment to government officer when they don't compliance or they violate the consensus of national consensus on combating the IUU fishing. So we have the internal, because government officer cannot be fired. So the only thing is by giving the disciplinary issue. That's what we try to make, that our own officer has commitment to it. So that's what we do. Thank you.
So I think if anybody had any questions about the determination of this minister or the Indonesian government to implementing this UNGP plus, as Pak Marzuki just referred to it, is dispelled in this room. And I think it's my pleasure to be able to ask all of you to thank the panel and express our appreciation for the comments that were expressed herein, and then we'll turn it back over to Michael Addo.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you very much, Your Excellency. I think we are learning quite a lot from how the UNGPs moved from a standard or a norm into practice. And I think there's clear evidence that it can be done, because it's been done in Indonesia, it's been done in France, it's been done in the UK. What we need to do now is to scale it up. And scale it up requires cooperation. Cooperation requires working together. Now, certainly from the point of view of the working group, we have certainly taken notes of what is happening under trends, and we are hoping to make recommendations to the Human Rights Council, and hopefully there will be some kind of consistent effort to take this approach forward. I am particularly pleased that in both panels there's a certain clear commitment to be faithful to the UNGP. So we haven't abandoned the UNGPs. In fact, we're taking the UNGPs forward to what Marzuki calls UNGP plus. I also see from both panels that there is a commitment for leadership, which is also an idea that underlies the UNGPs under Pillar 1, that the state will take the leadership and guide companies. Now we see that in practice, both in France, in the UK, and in Indonesia. We also see that it's becoming very clear that what it is that the companies want is clear direction and clear legislation, well, it looks like that's where we are moving, i.e. the UNGPs are moving towards legalization. But of course, we are faced with challenges. A number of very, very acute challenges were raised earlier in the French panel about reporting fatigue and compliance fatigue, and that leads us to the point of asking if the governments can come together into one common, coherent legislative framework. How this plays out, I think, is something we really need to look up. Somebody on the French panel suggested the best answer lies in the treaty. It may also very well be that there will be some kind of international cooperation agreements in the regional level or at the multilateral level. Whatever it is, the UNGPs will never be the same again in the light of what we have heard. So I'd like to, on behalf of my colleagues in the working group, say thank you to you, James, thank you to Minister, and thank you to the panelists for such an insightful presentation of your law. Thank you. And we shall bring the meeting to a close. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Baba. Thank you. So much compliment. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, I hope we'll see you in the next days.
I don't know. I will ask Thank you.
Michael, thank you so much for the wrap-up.
Thank you.
That's very good. Good. Well, I hope you're going to push this further and find some countries that will.
Hello.
Hey, thanks for the panel session. It was really interesting. You mentioned that you might have a